In the kind of darkness that swallows sound and erases the horizon, 6 American destroyers slipped across the waters of Vela Gulf. The night offered no moon, no starlight, only the low hum of engines and the steady sweep of a radar dish cutting through the void. Deep inside USS Dunlap, a thin line appeared on the SG radar scope. Just a faint pulse at first, but it was enough. 29,000 yards away, 4 Japanese destroyers were racing south, confident in the night they believed they owned. What the Japanese could not see, what they could not even imagine, was that the battlefield had changed. A year earlier, American ships had been ambushed again and again in these very waters, blinded by outdated equipment and doctrine. Now, the roles had quietly reversed. For the first time in the Pacific War, American destroyers were hunting in total darkness with certainty, not hope. But this transformation did not come from the steel of the ships alone. It came from a new way of thinking, from the hands of radar operators whose names history rarely preserves. And it raises a question: how did a force once defeated by the night learn to dominate it so completely? In the months before that August night, the waters around the Solomon Islands had been a graveyard for American hopes. Night after night, Japanese destroyers of the so-called Tokyo Express carved through the darkness with practiced confidence, landing troops, supplies, and reinforcements with a precision that seemed almost effortless. Their lookouts, trained from youth to read the sea by starlight, could spot targets long before American eyes could make sense of the shadows. Their Type 93 long-lance torpedoes, fast, deadly, and with twice the range of anything the United States possessed, turned every encounter into a deadly gamble. American ships had radar, but the early SC sets were crude tools in a cluttered theater. Their long wavelengths scattered across the jagged silhouettes of Savo Island, Guadalcanal, and Florida Island. On the radar scopes, land and ship merged into one confused blur. Again and again, captains hesitated, waiting for visual confirmation that never came in time. And in those moments of doubt, Japanese torpedoes were already tearing through hulls. Savo Island, Cape Esperance, Tassafaronga, Colombangara, the names became a litany of lessons paid in steel and blood. Yet beneath these setbacks, a quiet shift had begun. In 1941, engineers at MIT's Radiation Laboratory, working with Britain's breakthrough cavity magnetron, developed a new radar, the SG. Compact, precise, and built to operate at a 10-centimeter wavelength, it could distinguish a destroyer from the rocky spine of an island. More importantly, it presented its picture on a planned position indicator, a circular display that showed range and bearing together, allowing operators to track multiple contacts in real time. It was the first radar that could truly see the night as clearly as daylight. But technology alone could not overturn a doctrine rooted in caution. American naval strategy in early 1943 still placed cruisers at the center of night operations. Destroyers were escorts, extra eyes, extra guns, never the blade that struck first. Radar was a warning system, not a weapon. The idea of building an attack around electronic signals rather than the human eye was, to many senior officers, unthinkable. It took commanders like Arleigh Burke to challenge that belief. Having studied each defeat in the Solomons, Burke argued that radar was not a supplement, it was the future. Detect first, close fast, launch torpedoes before the enemy ever saw you. Open gunfire only after the torpedoes were running. His destroyer squadron proved the concept in action, registering victories that doctrine could not explain, but results could not deny. By mid-1943, a new question loomed over the Pacific. What if radar no longer served the fleet but led it? The answer would unfold in Vela Gulf, where a pure destroyer force, armed with SG sets and a new way of thinking, prepared to rewrite everything the night had once taken from them. On the morning of August 6th, 1943, 6 American destroyers slipped out of Purvis Bay with a clarity of purpose that few naval missions possessed. There were no cruisers to anchor their formation, no battleships to deliver the crushing broadside that doctrine demanded. This time, the destroyers would stand alone. Commander Frederick Moosbrugger had met with all 6 captains before departure, laying out a plan built not on tradition, but on a new logic shaped by radar. Division A, 1 Dunlap, Craven, and Maury would be the silent blade. Their torpedo batteries were full, and their task was simple in concept, but demanding an execution. Close to torpedo range, undetected, launch a coordinated salvo, and disappear into the darkness before the enemy understood what had happened. Division A, Tulang, Sterret, and Stack would maneuver into position to cross the Japanese T, bringing their 5-inch batteries to bear only after the torpedoes struck. There would be no searchlights, no ranging shots, no revealing flashes, and above all, there would be silence. Silence on the radios, silence on the guns, silence on the sea. The conditions favored them. Heavy overcast blotted out the sky, and visibility was scarcely 1,000 yards. The night was so dark that even trained lookouts could barely distinguish the water from the land. But inside the combat information centers, tiny rooms carved into the hearts of the ships, the operators saw a different world, one defined by circles, bearings, and moving blips. Here, in these cramped, dimly lit spaces, the night surrendered its secrets. At 23:33, the breakthrough came. The SG radar aboard Dunlap picked up 4 contacts, bearing 312 degrees, range 29,500 yards. A whisper of confirmation followed from Craven, then from Maury. The Japanese column was exactly where intelligence had predicted, moving fast 30 knots straight toward Vela Gulf. Moosbrugger issued the order that would frame the next moments of history. Division A1 was to prepare for a torpedo attack. As the range closed 27,000, 25,000, 20,000 yards, the CIC teams synchronized their plots. Every ship needed the same picture, the same firing solution, the same timing. The Japanese showed no sign of awareness. To them, the Gulf was empty, as it had always been on their previous supply runs. They did not know the Americans had come armed with a new way of seeing. At 15,000 yards, the Americans increased speed to 30 knots. The gap shrank even faster now. 10,000, 9,000, 8,000 yards. The tension in the CICs grew thick. Nothing moved except pencils, rotating antennas, and the steady rhythm of breath held just a little too long. Then, at 7,500 yards, Moosbrugger gave the order. Division A1 swung into position. Torpedo doors open. What happened next would end an era of Japanese dominance in the night. The moment the order came, the 3 destroyers of Division A1 moved with a precision that made the darkness feel irrelevant. At 23:41, Dunlap, Craven, and Maury fired their torpedoes 24 mark, 15 seconds sliding into the water with no flash, no thunder, nothing to betray their launch. In 63 seconds, the Americans had unleashed a weapon the Japanese never saw coming, and then immediately swung hard to starboard, accelerating to flank speed. Using the shadowed coastline of Kolombangara as cover, they vanished back into the black. Inside the American CICs, the world narrowed to a single calculation: time to impact. The operators watched their plots advance in silence. No one spoke. No one dared break the fragile rhythm of concentration. The torpedoes ran at 46 knots, invisible beneath the surface, except for the thin pencil lines that crept across the plotting boards. The ships themselves could see nothing. The night belonged entirely to math, training, and hope. 4 minutes can be an eternity in combat. At 23:46, the Gulf erupted. The first explosion tore through Hagikaze, a violent bloom of fire, followed by the rolling crack of a magazine detonation. Almost instantly, Arashi shuddered under multiple hits and came to a dead stop, flames climbing her superstructure. Moments later, Kawakaze carrying hundreds of soldiers was struck amidships. Witnesses later described the blast as if the sea itself had broken open. She capsized within minutes. The synchronized destruction was so sudden, so absolute, that it seemed impossible for a single attacking force to have done it. Only Shigure remained untouched, trailing behind the devastation. Commander Hara watched his formation disintegrate before he ever saw an American ship. When Division A2 opened fire, their muzzle flashes momentarily illuminated the Gulf, brief glimpses of American destroyers that had been completely invisible moments earlier. Hara launched 8 long-lance torpedoes in response, but in the chaos and darkness, all ran wide. For the Americans, the fight was nearly over. With 3 Japanese ships burning or sinking, Division A2's 5-inch guns shredded what little resistance remained. Within minutes, Hagikaze and Arashi slipped beneath the waves. Kawakaze had already vanished. The Gulf grew quiet again, disturbed only by distant fires reflecting on the black water. The cost was staggering. Around 1,210 Japanese sailors and soldiers were lost, most drowned before rescue could arrive. The Americans suffered no combat casualties. Only one sailor, injured in a non-battle accident, required treatment. It was a victory so lopsided that it defied every pattern of the war up to that point. And yet, the question lingered in the minds of American officers. Why had the Japanese seen nothing? The truth was simple and devastating. None of the Japanese destroyers at Vela Gulf carried effective radar. Their doctrine still demanded visual confirmation before action. Their legendary lookouts, unmatched in earlier battles, could not see through a darkness radar had learned to master. In those few minutes, the balance of night warfare shifted permanently. The age of Japanese supremacy in the dark had ended. In the hours after the battle, as the 6 American destroyers regrouped and searched the Gulf for survivors, a second transformation was already taking shape. This one not on the water, but across the entire Pacific Fleet. Commander Moosbrugger's after-action report spread rapidly through naval channels. His message was unambiguous. The SG radar had not merely assisted the attack, it had made it possible. It had given the destroyers the range, the timing, and the confidence to strike first. And for the first time in the long and bitter campaign for the Solomons, the United States Navy had won a night battle without paying in steel and blood. Admiral Wilkinson circulated the report to every destroyer squadron commander. What had happened in Vela Gulf was not a lucky break or a rare alignment of conditions. It was proof that doctrine could evolve. Captains who had once hesitated to trust electronic contacts now studied the engagement with renewed attention. The idea that destroyers could operate independently, using radar as their primary site, no longer seemed radical. Within days, other task groups adopted similar tactics. The effects were immediate. On August 17th, American destroyers used radar-guided torpedo attacks to sink 2 more Japanese destroyers near Bougainville. On September 6th, 3 more Japanese ships were lost in another nighttime engagement, again without American casualties. The kill ratio, once brutally tilted toward Japan, reversed almost overnight. The Japanese Navy, long accustomed to dominating the night, found itself outmaneuvered by a fleet that could now see farther, react faster, and strike with an accuracy they had not imagined. In Tokyo, the shock was palpable. Reports from Commander Hara and other surviving officers described the Vela Gulf attack as an ambush by unseen forces, submarines, aircraft, coastal guns, anything but destroyers, guided by radar alone. Even when Japanese intelligence concluded that American radar had improved dramatically, they misunderstood the deeper truth. They believed the technology was similar to their own. What they failed to see was the doctrinal revolution behind it. By late September 1943, Japanese command issued a painful directive: avoid night surface combat with American forces unless holding overwhelming numerical advantage. The Tokyo Express runs that had once defined Japanese mobility dwindled. When they continued, they relied on submarines or smaller craft rather than destroyers. Around the world, the lesson was unmistakable. Technological shifts in warfare do not announce themselves with fanfare. They appear first in the hands of those willing to rethink old assumptions. And on that night in Vela Gulf, the United States Navy proved that the way a tool is used can be more decisive than the tool itself. When the smoke cleared over Vela Gulf, the battlefield returned to its quiet, an empty stretch of dark water with no monument to mark what had occurred there. The 3 Japanese destroyers lay scattered across the seafloor, their stories silenced within minutes. The American ships steamed away, unscathed, carrying with them a lesson that would ripple across the Pacific and into every navy that dared to fight in the dark. In the months that followed, the SG radar became the unseen backbone of American night operations. Its compact frame and flickering PPI display turned destroyers into hunters, capable of reading the night with a precision no lookout could match. Yet the technology itself was only half the story. The other half belonged to the men buried deep inside the combat information centers. The radarmen, plotters, communicators, and technicians who learned to trust the rhythm of their instruments as if their own lives depended on it. Their names rarely appeared in official reports. Their contributions were wrapped in wartime secrecy, sealed behind classification labels, and later erased by the relentless march of new technology. But commanders remembered. Moosbrugger would later tell young officers that no captain, no matter how seasoned, could fight effectively without listening to the technicians who understood the heartbeat of their machines. Hara, reflecting on the battle years after the war, acknowledged Vela Gulf as a perfect American victory, one shaped not by overwhelming force, but by superior understanding of how to fight in a new age. Today, little remains of the SG radar. Most units were scrapped after the war, their metal recycled, their components dispersed. The CICs, where operators once bent over glowing screens, have been torn out or lost to time. Even USS Dunlap, the ship that made first contact that night, was sold for scrap in 1947. History kept the names of admirals and captains, but the hands that turned the dials, steadied the scopes, and plotted the lines have faded into anonymity. Yet their legacy endures in every modern Navy that fights with electronic eyes, trusts digital signals, and builds doctrine around information rather than visibility. Vela Gulf was not simply a victory, it was a turning point, a moment when the night itself changed allegiance. And so we're left with the enduring question. When technology reshapes the battlefield, will we recognize the moment or only understand it in hindsight? If stories like this one resonate with you, consider joining us as we explore more forgotten chapters of military history. Share your thoughts in the comments. What do you see as the lasting lesson of Vela Gulf and of the men who mastered the darkness?